Welcome, everybody, back to Velo Sound, regular Sunday interview, and I'm very, very happy to have another one of those. Let's play longer tracks than ever, monsters here on the show. We have Tim from Khanate. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure for us. And just to point it out, I still believe that this summer is the summer of long track records. You know, your record, which does not really have a radio size song on it. We already had Bellwitch on the show, Eremit has been on the show. So a lot of bands who like to go the long way. Is that also something that you think is the best possible format for Khanate? Longer tracks, more than 5, 6, 7 minutes?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, each riff, if you want to call it a riff, takes so long to, you know, kind of complete itself. So if we were to do a 5-minute song, you know, we would get through maybe 2 riffs with just a few repetitions. Like this kind of music just needs that much time to unfold properly. So yeah, you know, I think the shortest song maybe we ever did was Dead, perhaps, and I think that was 8 minutes long.
Yeah,
I might be wrong with that.
I think it's somewhere between. I think it's either 8 or 9, but it's a shorty for your measures.
Yeah, but it seems every time we've gone in to do it, they always land right around 20 minutes. Just we're not aiming for that, you know. Typically, it just goes that way, you know.
Do you think that to this kind of music, I always think of it as a very heavy neoclassical thing, but we'll come to that in a moment. Would you say that for this kind of music, repetition is key?
Yeah, I think so. At least for us, it you know, seems key. If the parts kept on continually changing, I think that the effect that it has, you know, overall would be lessened. You know, the repetition kind of draws you in, you know, a bit more. So yeah, you know, I certainly appreciate music that kind of keeps drifting and going in different directions, but you know, for us, it's just not the right thing.
You just mentioned that you like to pull people into your music. Is there, how should I say? Is there something like the idea of a mantra, of a ritual behind it, maybe even in a sense?
No, not in particular. And, you know, as far as pulling people in, I can't even say that that's any bit of a goal, you know, when we're working on the music. It's pretty much self-satisfaction that we're aiming for. And, you know, then, you know, some people get it and some people don't, and that's fine. But yeah, you know, we're not particularly focused on, as I imagine a lot of bands probably aren't focused so much on how the music is going to be received by the audience. You know, it's just not a thought too much during the process. Once you're done with the music, I think, hey, let's get this in front of as many people as possible, you know, but during the process, it's not really much considered, you know.
When you then prepare your stage performances, which are not a regular occurrence for Khanate, but when you plan those, is there, or how much room for improvisation is there?
There's a fair amount. You know, we haven't prepared this music for live performances since, you know, way back in our first run. Like, you know, we're going to dig into it. I guess we can talk about it a bit more later, but, you know, we're planning on some live performances coming up. So we will dig into this process again. But
remember, Europe, very important.
Yeah.
Europe.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I'm supposed to keep my big mouth shut, you know, for now until they announce it.
But let's get back. When you plan those staging moments, is there something like improvisation?
Yeah. You know, because the the music on the records are, put together in a certain way. There's a whole process where it's assembled. On most of the records we did, the songs weren't fully formed when we went in to record them. We would record individual sections, and James, the bassist in the band, he would then, kind of head up putting the arrangements together, with these individual sections. And then when it came to doing live performances, we would, go back to the record and start with the songs as they were on the recording, but they just naturally started evolving. Some things that worked on the recording maybe isn't going to work so well live. Maybe we start developing, some parts of the songs, and goes in a different direction. But yeah, I mean, Khanate's music, I would say, is probably 90% structured and 10% improvised. And live shows, yeah, the improvised sections maybe tend to go on a bit longer, So yeah, there's some aspect of that there.
As we've already spoken about repetition and, being pulled into it. I mean, like, I know that Khanate's last live performances already are a little bit back, but is there a moment when you guys on stage also, you yourself, get drawn into the music, and it's just, okay, let's do it one more round and another repetition, where you feel that very same pull?
Not in terms of extending sections. Like the structured stuff, we stick to it, like usually the lyrics, the vocals are kind of a guide, because it's pretty easy to get lost in these sections, as you can imagine. When you have a section that goes on for 8 minutes, I'll be sitting there thinking, is this repetition, 22 or, 28 or whatever? Yeah, I mean, we don't, maybe just the improv sections would extend, but the structured stuff stays the same. But yeah, as far as getting pulled into the music, absolutely. Like, I've had moments playing these shows where I'm have my eyes closed, I'm playing, and so drawn into the sounds where, at some point I'll open my eyes and be like, oh yeah, you're in front of an audience of people. Like, pretty much forget that I'm even in a performance. And, it's very easy to get drawn into the sound when it's that loud. There's this, all the vibrations, kind of get drawn into the womb, so to speak, and it's easy to get lost in that.
But I'm very sure those are also the moments which are the most magical, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the music, I think is played best that way. We're definitely not a band, pretty obvious, that's interacting with the audience a whole lot. We're not doing like the cheerleader metal that a lot of bands do, where they're facing the audience and working the audience. There's, none of that.
Wait, this is not Limp Bizkit?
Right.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean. But
yeah, so the music is best when you kind of, I think this music is best when you kind of almost forget there is an audience in a way, and just get drawn into it. And, the music gets more powerful, at least for me, with that.
Totally agree with that, because on the other side, from the spectators or audience side, for me, that is always what I want. I want to see a band who not only likes what we're doing, but who, if it's best if it has the same effect on the musicians, because then you see that they're really into it and that they like it and that they don't want to change anything about it, like that for them, their own music still holds that kind of appeal. So I think from a spectator point of view, that's a very, very cool thing.
Yeah, the audience is almost more like voyeurs, I guess, at a Khanate show than participants necessarily, though there have been some audiences that have gotten pretty wild, and that does, get everybody a bit more fired up usually on stage. But Yeah, for the most part, like I said, I think it's kind of more of like a voyeur situation in the audience than a, participant, so to speak.
Hmm. You have been talking or hinting at the process of writing Khanate songs, and especially for the new record. Um, would you say, or no, let's first ask, how can we imagine any kind of songwriting process for To Be Cruel? How did that record assemble itself?
Well, it started out, Stephen and I hadn't played together since the old Khanate days. We were good friends. We hung out, throughout all those years, but we hadn't played together. And we had an opportunity to record in New York together around maybe 2015 or 16, with Mark Urselli. He's, producer. I'm not sure if you know Mark.
We know him because we
He
also featured his last record that he has, Steppen Doom, right?
Steppen Doom, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Yeah, I've been friends with Mark for years, and him and I worked on some music together probably 10 years ago. And he, was a fan of Sun and Khanate, and him and Steven had been talking about doing some kind of recording together. And, it ended up Steve was coming to New York, and we decided, hey, let's just jump in Mark's studio and record something, see how it goes. And if I remember right, I think maybe Steve had already been asked to contribute a song to the Hexatic record Ben Chesney was doing for Drag City. It was a compilation record, where he has a certain way of writing songs. And Steve thought, hey, let's use this method and compose a song based on it. So we got together, recorded this one song with Mark, and we thought it came out great. And Steve and I kept talking and decided, hey, let's jump into a studio somewhere and just work on music together and like see what comes of it, kind of thing. When we initially planned this, it wasn't necessarily going to be for a Khanate record. We just were kind of, let's get in there and see what happens. So we booked a studio north of London in Woburn, England, I believe is the name of the town. It's kind of this little farm town, a couple of hours north of London. Like great setting. There's like just the buildings in the middle, this farmland. You look out the window and it's just farmland as far as the eye can see. So yeah, we planted ourselves there for I think a week, and we just would come up with ideas. And when we felt like they've, reached a good point, we had Jamie Gomez record them. And, we just kept on banging them out one after the next for a week. And when we started listening back to this towards the end of the week, Steve and I were sitting and listening, and I was just like, this sounds like Khanate, again, which should be no big surprise. Of course, that's what we naturally land on. But so yes, then Steve and I went back to his place in Paris, and I spent some time there with him, and we were going over the recordings and talking about it more. And we were like, this could be good opportunity to do Khanate record based on these, parts that we came up with. So then, we got in touch with Jim and asked him, James, I guess I should say, as people will know him as James. And, James was fully into it. He listened to the ideas. He thought a lot of the ideas were great. And, then we talked to Alan, and, he was into it. Alan was maybe a little skeptical at first. He liked the ideas, but he was a little hesitant, like, let's see where this goes, kind of attitude. And then, at that point, Jim started taking our ideas and creating arrangements. He would bounce them off us. We'd give him some feedback. And, we started getting those arrangements together. And then, then the process went from there. Jim recorded bass, Alan started working on his vocals, and it came together. So it was kind of a return to, we wrote music and arranged it in the same way in the old days. There was only one record where we didn't do that, capture and release. And so this was kind of a return to our original way of writing music, you know.
But if I understand it right, then there has not been one moment where all four of you have been in the same room. It's like adding layer and layer and layer on it, right?
Yeah. Are you talking about for this new record
Yeah, for this new record.
Yeah, let's see. It was Stephen and I, of course, for the initial writing. And then, yeah, all four of us were in the studio the first time we tried to mix this thing. We ended up having a second mix because we weren't happy with the first mix. But yeah, I mean, the closest it came to the full band being in the same studio, other than that, was we recorded vocals, percussion, and reamped some bass parts at Colin Marston's studio in New York City. And that was Jim or James, Alan, and I all together, you know, doing that. So that was the closest we came from all four of us, you know.
Yeah, because I know for everybody, we are talking about highly workaholic people. I mean, like we have Stephen O'Malley, who everybody should know. And if you don't know him, check out the interview that we did with him. Just below this one somewhere, you will find an interview with O'Malley. We have James Plotkin, who is, first of all, not only one of the best masters and mixers in the whole wide world, but also busy as hell, if I may say so. So it's hard to get all four of you together, and I mean, like we have, of course, Alan, we have you, so I can see that it's very, very difficult to get all four of you in a room.
Yeah, you know, you would think that maybe that would be the best way for a band to work on music, and it's probably true in the vast majority of cases. But with us, music is, you know, maybe better put together that way. Though, again, with Capture and Release, Stephen and I really got it in our head, like, hey, when we play these songs live, they develop into something that we feel is a step above what's on the record. And for Capture and Release, Stephen and I were like, hey, let's write these songs completely together as a band and do it that way. But, you know, James wasn't as fond of the idea. He doesn't really like to work that way. He works more spontaneously and, you know, doesn't really have the patience to be going to a rehearsal room 4 days a week and being in there for hours just hammering away at stuff. It's just not the way he really likes to work on music. So for that record, Stephen and I just started working on it, and James kind of bowed out to some degree, and then just kind of joined in at the end after Stephen and I had already, you know, kind of fully composed these songs.
Yeah.
You know, and then of course that was the record that like most of the guys in Khanate don't like. Stephen and I like the record, you know, maybe just our personal attachment to it, but
yeah,
you know,
I can see that.
The other guys in the band definitely aren't too fond of it.
I mean, like it's very, very different. It's a very different approach, and of course, I mean, like music, and every record that we listen to is basically one stage in a process, right? And if you do not fully like the process, then the end result, I guess, can be as good as it wants to be, but you know, the process is the dominating thing. Therefore, I can see that, you know, it might not even have to do might not even have anything to do with the record or with the songs or the structures, but you know, the process is the more important thing here, I guess.
Right. Yeah. I think you got to look at the individual personalities in the band, understand them, and work within, you know, what works well instead of, you know, kind of running with a typical way of writing music. You know, maybe that's not going to work. And, you know, for us, it's been the process has worked great doing it this way. So we'll, you know, stick with it, I guess. And you know, all's good that way.
Now let's talk about the songs themselves and also a little bit about the reception of a record. The record, first of all, it's of course it was a surprise. You know, it was one of the biggest surprises of the year, I guess. How much work did you have to put into it to keep it a secret for as long as you did until release day?
Yeah, I mean, it took for some of us probably more of an effort than others. Like, Steven is of course constantly doing shows and
Yeah.
out there. So the rumors were floating around because of course there's no way to totally keep a lid on it. Like certain people are going to hear about it.
Yeah.
And somehow I don't know how it didn't like get out into the general public. Somehow it stayed quiet. But yeah, like, I had a couple of friends who I had told, like, uh, just almost I had to, because there was like things I was doing where I had to be like, hey, I'm going off to England for a while or whatever. And then a couple of those people chatted to their friends, and we had to put out fires here and there. We'd be
Mm.
talking to each other in Khanate and be like, who told so and so that we're working on the record? Be scolding each other and stuff. I got busted a couple of times for telling a person or two. And, but then we all were really staying tight lipped about it for the last, few years. I mean, we started working on this thing like 5 years ago or something like that. So we've been keeping this quiet for 5 years. The pandemic, I guess, helped us keep it quiet for a bit. But yeah, it took a bit of an effort, because when you're working on something, I guess there's a certain amount of excitement and you
Yeah.
want to talk to people about it. And,
Mm.
we all like to just keep it to ourselves. And I think it was for the better. At first, I was a bit like, really? Like, why should we keep this quiet? But,
Mm.
now looking back on it, to constantly have people kind of pecking away and asking questions while you're still trying to go through the process could become really distracting and, annoying. So, kind of glad we stuck with it and saw it through that way.
Yeah, it's also
I
a
think
way
it
that
really
as soon
helped.
as you more or less officially start talking about it, expectations will build, right? And if you keep quiet, then it's a surprise, and you don't have to fulfill anybody's expectations. Imagine you had told anybody like 2 or 3 years ago, "Oh, Khanate is working on a new record." Everybody would have been asking any one of you in the band for as often as possible. Okay, when is the new Khanate coming out? Oh yeah, yeah, we like what you did on
Right.
this
Yeah.
record, but new Khanate, when? I can see that. I can see that
Yeah.
work.
Right. Yeah. And as impervious as maybe the members of the band are, that expectation could start playing on your mind in some way and affect
Mm.
the way that you work on the music to some degree. I don't think it would be too big of a threat with Con 8, but it could have altered things. So, glad we stuck with it.
Was it also maybe in a way a self-preservation thing? Because I mean, like, I'm not sure if you right from the start knew, okay, this is going to be our new record, or had there ever been any moment where it was still up for grabs if this was going to turn out to be a new Khanate record?
Yeah, like we of course only wanted to release it if it turned out, great, if we felt it was a powerful record. And we wanted to, as we were working on it, we felt strongly about it, but you don't know, until, especially with the method we're working on it, you have to see how all the different things come together.
Mm.
So, that was another part of it. It's like we don't want to announce that we're working on a record, figure out halfway through the process this isn't working, and then have to deal with all the aftermath of that and explaining it to everybody. So yeah, it helped in that regard too. Yeah.
Mm. Um, and now the music itself, would you feel underappreciated if I said that there are moments when I feel that the music is very brittle?
Brittle.
In a way, like, I don't
Is-
want to say fragile, because when we listen to such strong and heavy riffs, it's very, very heavy. It's not fragile, but there have been moments on the record when I felt like, okay, as strange as it is, but there are moments in it when I thought, okay, it's heavy, but it's not muscular. It is heavy, but also intimate, and sometimes even bordering on fragile. It's like, it's not like, oh yeah, let's compare it with mugs. You can take your very strong porcelain mugs and pump it on the table and nothing will happen. Strongly built and
Mhm.
everything. And on the other hand, you can take a plastic cup, put it on your table and it will crunch into pieces. There is something. There are moments of a record when, of course, we have these very, very strong, powerful, muscular moments, and the muck is not going to break. And on the other hand, there are also moments on there, which I think is something that I had not heard before on Khanate records in that sense, when I felt, okay, this might, I don't want to say break, but this might falter, because as heavy as it is, it's still a very intimate and very brittle moment.
Right. Yeah. I guess maybe you're thinking that it's almost like moments of being vulnerable on the record, perhaps.
Yep. Good way.
But yeah, yeah, I know what you're saying. And like, I've thought about this over the years, just in terms of like my own playing, where, when I was younger, to create powerful music, or powerful performance, you're like strong arming it. It's, oh, it's going to be great if I just muscle it and make everything as hard as possible. And over time, you start to figure out the power is in the idea. If you have a strong idea, you don't have to be muscling it to, give it power. It kind of just has power on its own, even if it might be brittle or vulnerable, like, and have confidence in the idea and don't try to beat someone over the head with it. It's almost like a bit desperate to be trying so hard to shove something down someone's throat or whatever. And I think it's much more powerful to have a great idea, have confidence in that idea, and deliver it in the way that it sounds best, and not necessarily a muscular or forceful, approach. And maybe what you're hearing in the music is, that in some regard, everybody in the band maturing as musicians. And I don't know that I've talked to anybody in Khanate specifically about what I just told you, but, I would get a feeling that maybe these guys have, come to a similar, conclusion or, thought of, you don't have to be going full force like that. And in another band I play, Blind Idiot God, the guitar player, Andy, has talked about this in interviews and to me, where, like in heavy music, you have this thing where bands are like trying to beat you over the head with a bat, and you can have so much more power, delivering it in a different way. It's not about how hard you hit something, which sounds ridiculous probably coming from me, because at the old shows, everything was hit as hard as possible. But yeah, I think again, it's kind of this transfer of power from the muscle to the idea, over time.
Is it also something like you don't want to or again, that's just perception, but maybe that is the important thing here. Just like you said, it's not about overpowering people, it's not about turning the amp to 23, you know what I mean? And trying to be as loud and as heavy and as powerful as possible. But I have a feeling as if this record in particular leaves a little bit more space for the listener to fill on one's own.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good observation. And probably one of the things, like when we left off with Khanate years ago, we felt like the music still had, it could be developed more, and there was more directions to go in. And, I think that was what you're saying is probably one of the directions, and at the time, maybe we just, we didn't have the time to develop it as fully as we would like. Maybe we hadn't matured as, musicians and songwriters to that extent to, do it. But that's what was kind of exciting about getting back together again now to do this was, it's like, wow, here's this opportunity with this, wisdom that we've been able to accumulate over the years, and now like really dig into this, that do it in the way that we were clumsily getting to, over the course of the other records, because when you're in the middle of creating something, that's Khanate obviously is not like a kind of a set genre of music. Like we were almost had a feeling like, of course, there's anything that's created comes from somewhere, like stuff that you've heard. But if you're kind of almost creating a new style, it's going to be a little clumsy, and you're experimenting, and certain things work, certain things don't. And now we have the benefit of time to look back on all of that and understand exactly how this music could be made in the most powerful way and actually do it. And that's what it felt like on this record. It's like, all right, we got this opportunity now to take what we were trying to achieve maybe at that time and actually fully fulfill it now. So
can you name maybe like one or two or three possible influences on your own style of playing? Not just necessarily for Khanate, but in general. Have there been records and artists lately where you say like, okay, that is something that I really like. I don't want to emulate it, but I want to take something from it that influenced you?
Yeah, I mean, I try to personally not be too directly influenced by anything. With that, I'm fully aware that, of course, like, everything you're taking in, is existing in your unconscious mind, and it's going to come out, in your conscious mind. I almost like to stay a bit naive about it and not even understand where it's coming from. Like, I know there's people who work on music. I've worked with people like this who will be like, oh, wow, I really like this song, from someone else. And they'll take it and kind of use that as a blueprint for a song they're writing. And to me, I just never would I want to do that. Like, I want it to be coming from this pure place. I don't know if it's pure so much as, again, maybe I'm just kind of staying naive about it to give myself the feeling that what I'm doing is, not so tainted, from the outside. But that being said, yeah, I mean, when I started playing drums, I was taking jazz lessons. My parents sent me to a jazz teacher. So I started out playing jazz. I learned how to read music, and it was just all jazz. But I was a budding metalhead, at the time. And, while my teacher was teaching me all this jazz stuff, I'd be going home and putting on my metal records and whatnot. So, I would say as far as my influences, it's kind of a combo of different jazz drummers and, like older metal stuff, kind of coming together. At least my early influences, were in that realm. And then, as I got to my late teen years and into my 20s, I started really branching out and listening to all kinds of music, avant-garde music, dub, just anything and everything. So then these influences were coming in at that point. And, that was the period leading up to where Khanate was getting started, where I was heavily into experimental music and, minimal music. And, like Khanate, of course, we end up having this thing where we get lumped in with the doom scene. And, for obvious reasons, like I'm not going to sit here and say there's no aspect of it that doesn't sound doomy. But at least for me, stepping into Khanate, I wasn't listening to doom music really at all at that time. All these bands that a lot of the doom crowd worship, Sleep, and, you can go on and on with all the different doom bands. For me, that kind of like blues-based doom approach, while I like some of those bands, was not any bit of an influence. It's coming more from maybe the avant-garde side of music and, approaching it from that way. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if you're asking me like specifically what influences, like drummers that I was influenced by on the jazz side: Tony Williams, Elvin Jones, Jack DeJohnette, a lot of those guys. And, and then on the rock side of it, I started out with your typical kind of cheesy rock stuff when I was, young: Motley Crue and
Def Leppard.
And not yeah, like these type things. And, then I quickly proceeded, thank God, to, some other stuff.
Yeah.
And, also some great stuff when I was young. My older brother was really into Van Halen. So, like, Van Halen was one of the first, like, heavy,
Mhm.
I don't want to say heavy, but one of the first rock bands that I was really into when I was like 8, 9 years old. I
Okay.
was, listening to David Roth era Van Halen. I was really into Rush. I'd sit and put on Rush and Van Halen records and
Mhm.
play along with them. You know, so it was kind of this combo of jazz stuff, rock stuff, and then leading into experimental music. John Zorn, I started listening to and going to a lot of his shows, and I was into Swans, 80s Swans. You know,
But it's
so
interesting that you mentioned metal and jazz, and then you already mentioned Rush, which a lot of people, I mean, like, I don't want to say they're the middle because they're not, of course, but they are somewhere from a musicianship point of view, they're somewhere in the middle, right? They're not Buddy Rich, but they're also not Nico McBain,
right.
but it's an interesting combo. It's yeah, I can see a lot of that work. Has there not as an influence, but generally, has there been anybody in the last, let's say, 10 years whose records or whose work really blew you away, where you said, like, okay, that is great stuff, that is looking at music in a way that I have never done before myself?
hmm Nothing is coming to mind. I've heard bands that I've liked over the last 10 years,
Mhm.
but I haven't heard anything in the last 10 years that's blown me away in that way. And, like sometimes I'll do the typical thing that maybe, people my age start doing where it's like, oh, this modern music's bullshit. It was so much better back in the day. But then, like, sometimes you start questioning, you know, as you get older, does just the way you take in music, change to a point that you can't have that same mind blowing experience, with a new band. And I don't know. I can't even say I know the answer. I don't know if modern music has really gotten lamer, or I don't know if my perspective has shifted. Who knows? I did read this study, and maybe you saw it, where they used some computer, program to analyze music, and it showed that modern music really is more limited than older music. There's a lesser variety of rhythms and melodies and harmonies and everything in modern music. Like they showed you on the thing, and it started out where it was super wide, and then as the years went on, it was just
Yeah, I know what
more
you
and
mean.
more. So who knows? Maybe there is something to it, or maybe I'm just becoming an old man who's like, fuck these young guys.
I think it's somewhere in the middle. I mean, like, of
Yeah.
course, I don't want to call myself a music journalist because I'm not, but I would say that if you look for really, really good new music, you will find it. I'm not making any kind of advertisement for us because I know we're the best side out there. No, but honestly, I think that there are always great records, but the problem is, and here the internet is not to benefit, but a curse. I think we are flooded with new music, and therefore it becomes harder and harder and harder to really find the good new stuff. If anybody asks me, I can already tell you a record from 2023 that will show you music that you have not listened to this way. And that is Divide and Dissolve's last record, which came out 6-7 weeks ago. That record
Mhm.
is something new. It might take bits and pieces from other genres, definitely. I mean, it mixes doom and jazz. It mixes Aboriginal music with tribal rituals, and it very openly talks about the negative effects of a post-colonial world, with emphasis on the colonial experiences. But I think it's very, very hard to find those records.
Right.
And I mean, like you in Khanate, you come from a time when it was not about getting your music out on streaming. But would you, for yourself, not as a representative of everyone in the band, but would you say for yourself that it has become more difficult to find new listeners?
New listeners, like as in an audience for our music?
Yes.
Yeah. No, I mean it seems easier just, because with the internet, anybody and everybody can listen, to this thing. So I think that it's become much easier to have listeners, but of course, Khanate already has like a built-in audience from the past, and all of us have done stuff since. So for us, maybe it's a bit of a special situation. I imagine if we were a new band coming out right now and nobody knew who we are, that yeah, maybe it would be more difficult to find listeners, but yeah, and for people like you, I need more friends like you, I think, in terms of finding new music. Like I always had friends back in the day with huge record collections, like James from Khanate being one of them. Like when him and I, became friends, maybe mid to late 90s, and he had this massive record collection and he just nonstop buying records. And I'm not as much of a collector as he is. So he was very valuable, and other friends of mine, where instead of me having to spend months and months seeking out every record and finding the good stuff and putting the bad stuff to the side, James and I had similar taste. So he did maybe all the dirty work, for me, of sifting through this stuff. And I got to hear from him what the gems are. And a lot of times they were gems.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so people like yourself who are listening to a lot of music, I think it's very valuable, because like here's people who can kind of, if their tastes align with your own, can really sift through and find the stuff for you. And I'm so busy working on music that I'm playing on, that I don't have the time to be listening to everybody's record in full and digging in that way.
But there we're again at the point, too much, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there is too much. Right. Yeah, in the old days, yeah, this thing, of course, where labels are kind of in some way putting stuff to the side and, maybe putting the stronger stuff forward. And now just everything is forward in your face and you don't know what to choose,
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, like I still remember my subscriptions to, for example, Sub Pop or Pelagic Records, when some of them I still have, because those were labels that you just simply trusted, right? If Discord brought out a new record, I wouldn't hesitate. I would just buy it. I knew, okay, Ian has a good taste. I'll take it. But it's more difficult nowadays. Let's talk a little bit about the reception of the record. I mean, like it's out now for a few weeks already. How has the reception been so far?
Pretty strong. Like, I remember on the release day, I was staying at a friend's place, like cat sitting for a friend here in Berlin. And like when the release came out, my phone literally for like the next 24 hours, there was like a sound every 2 seconds, like people getting in touch. And yeah, I mean, it's gone great. I'm not sure how it could go any better. It seems there's a lot of people interested, mostly positive comments, about it. And yeah, I mean, I couldn't see it really going any better, than it did.
Yeah. Is it
that's satisfying.
You go ahead.
It's satisfying. Like I said earlier, like with us working on the music, it isn't a goal to try to make a big splash. We're trying to satisfy ourselves. But of course, when you create something and you put it out and, a hell of a lot of people are think it's great. It feels good. So
Of course it does.
yeah. So
I mean, like I don't know how many of my friends I had in my feed on social media, and I think for like a day or even a week, I could not go, like scrolling through it, and I think like every third or fourth person was like, "Oh, the new Khanate, the new Khanate." I had friends who literally were like, "Oh, I get to see a new Khanate. My life can go on." I'm like, as much of an exaggeration that is. I mean, like, of course, but there
yeah.
you can also see, and that is something that I think is interesting, and that I would also like to ask: isn't it a cool way to see how much relevance you as a band still have, although it's been years since the last Kanye
Mhm.
record came out?
Yeah, it's surprising because, you see over the years a lot of bands who were around and, did what you thought was good music and they go away for years. A lot of young people especially don't know who they are, and it's hard for the band to kind of get off the ground and do stuff. That's often the case. So yeah, it was, a little surprising and good to see how many people were into this. And
Mm.
it's a bit rare that I think a band is around and somehow they get much more popular years after they've broken up. Glad this happened, but yeah, and I'm sure, of course, some of that is like everyone in the band has been doing stuff since, and maybe I'm sure the fact that we were doing that, there's people that have been going back and checking out our old bands. Steve in particular, again, he's been doing so much stuff with Sun and
Yeah,
otherwise.
yeah.
So, I'm sure a chunk of the people who are interested now are, probably, people who've been following Steven and now are like, oh, what is this band that he was in the past? Or they had already gone back and heard us years ago. So yeah, I guess maybe us staying active in various ways over the years kind of kept an intact and even growing crowd, over time.
Are you still playing shows with Dana, with Insect Arc?
Yeah, we're not doing shows at this moment, but we just recorded a new record in Athens. We flew down to Greece and recorded down there. So we recorded in March, and mixing is happening now. That's being done. So she is busy with Swans.
I know she's on. Yeah, yeah,
You know, yeah, she is about to head out to do quite a bit of touring through the end of the year.
yeah.
So we're like getting this mixed right now, and we're talking with a couple of labels about releasing it. And if all goes well, we'll release this thing probably early next year. And we plan on touring quite a bit, with it.
Remember to tell all the labels that you're talking to that the first premiere must be on Veil of Sound.
Yeah. Okay. I will let them know.
Just a joke. I have two more questions before we come to the end of our interview with the infamous Quickfire round. Your record is called "To Be Cruel." The new Khanate record, "To Be Cruel." What is the sense behind the title? Because of course it's an ambiguous one.
Mm-hmm.
Or
Right.
what do you make of the
Yeah.
title?
Well, it took a while for us to kind of sift through, and like this, Alan, the vocalist,
Yeah.
largely, spearheads this effort to figure out what would be the best, title. But yeah, we were looking through the lyrics, and there was a number of good choices because Alan has a way of putting together lyrics, I think, that are great as individual phrases. There's some, people who write lyrics where if you pluck out a few of the words, maybe it isn't, so great. But the way Alan writes, you kind of have a bunch of gems in there. There's all these little phrases that you could lift and they stand alone nicely. Yeah, I believe it might have been Alan who picked out To Be Cruel. And I guess it goes along with the theme of his lyrics overall. he's kind of digging into the mindset of a twisted person and how they might go about things. And it I guess it pretty well represents the overall theme on the album. Like somebody had pointed it, actually Dana had pointed it out to me somewhere along the line when I told her To Be Cruel was the title. She was like, there's a Swans record, I think, To Be Kind or To Be she thought like you guys or to be something.
It is To Be something. I'll look it up. Just go on.
Yeah, she was like, maybe you guys want to rethink that. Like, somebody might think but it stood strongly on its own, and it had nothing to do, with Swans, of course. But yeah, we had to think about it for a while. But yeah, I don't think there's anything too deep with it. It kind of was one of the cooler phrases, that Alan had, and just kind of in some way kind of represented well the overall lyrical content on the record.
It is To Be Kind. To Be Kind from 2014.
Kind,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's
I guess
also
people are in different spaces.
And it's also something that that struck me is when I talked about Khanate, or when I talked about your band with a few friends of mine already like a decade ago, they said, this is some of the cruelest stuff I've ever heard. And I was like, why? And one of them actually literally said, well, because they don't want to please anybody's ears. And I was like, true. That's why I like it. But is that something like you don't mean to be cruel on people's ears? It's just the stuff that you like to hear as a band?
Yeah. It's more about us just doing what we actually think sounds good, and that just happens to be cruel. Of course, there's a small element of it, maybe somewhat humorous element of it when we were doing live shows where there would be a thrill in going in and unleashing this. There was some shows where it felt like we were tossing a grenade in the room or something. Like I remember a show in maybe Norway where the venue we played at was condemned right before the show. They said the building might collapse or something ridiculous. And our show got combined with Mary Lou Lord's show. Do you know Mary Lou Lord? She's a singer-songwriter.
Okay.
Yeah, she's a singer-songwriter, like, acoustic guitar, like not at all a Khanate audience. But I remember before that show, watching her perform a bit, and like you see people in colorful clothing, clearly there to see her. And then, a bunch of big dudes with beards and black shirts. And it was just fun seeing this, like,
I know what you mean.
Seeing these different audiences together. But I remember us before our set, we're just kind of talking a bit. It's like, oh man, all these people are going to be standing there, like not knowing what's about to, come, Mary Lou Lord's audience. And we like decided, I think it was the song Pieces of Quiet, to like not even do the intro on it, just come out, full blast. And I still remember just seeing on the faces, this wave of people trying to get to the exits. It looked like they were caught at the exits trying to get out. And, again, there's maybe just some immature 14-year-old, like your inner 14-year-old is pleased. You just walked into a room and unleashed this massive sound, and, you made people run away. So, maybe there's a little bit of the cruel thing as a joke, like, but when we're working on the music, we're not sitting there thinking like, oh, how can we make this horrible sound that's really gonna displease people? We're actually making sounds that please ourselves.
Is there some kind of catharsis for you doing Khanate songs? That just struck me when I thought about it.
Yeah, I think there is. There's like anybody, there's certain amount of anger inside over various things. And I guess what better way to release that than to hit things as hard as you possibly can, so there's something to it, it's good. I think I had read some study about how metal people are the most well-adjusted people, they say, of like all music genres, and
There have been
the
loads of
conclusion
studies
was,
like this. Yes.
yeah, there's a release that you're getting to have of these negative thoughts
Yeah.
and hate and anger. And a lot of people maybe who aren't into this type music don't get to have that release. And they're probably angrier because of it. And, in my experience going around in the metal scene for my whole life, some of the nicest people I meet are within the metal scene. And, maybe it's because we're all releasing our anger,
I totally believe that. I'm 100% sure of that.
Right.
One last question before we come to the quickfire round. You have hinted at it, and of course I cannot leave you without it. You've hinted at tour plans. So might we hope for a Khanate tour in 2024?
Yeah. Right now we're looking probably like spring of 2024. Kind of a handful of shows are being worked on. We're not, planning an all out, tour thing right now, but we're going to kind of, do a handful of shows and decide what we want to do from there. But, yeah, there's some good ones being planned. They're in the middle right now of, figuring that all out. So I believe there was supposed to be an announcement already, but I think probably within the next few weeks, there'll be a proper announcement, on that.
And for everybody watching this, if there has already been an announcement, to give you full transparency, we recorded this interview on July 27th. So when you're listening or watching this, and there has been an announcement, don't think I'm the stupid bald guy who doesn't know shit. But at this very moment, there has been no official statement. Tim, first of all, thanks for all the insight. But of course, I cannot let you go without having you to go through our infamous quickfire round. You will get a couple of alternative questions like roses versus tulips, Godflesh versus Napalm Death, AC versus DC, guns versus roses. And you have to choose one of them and give a short explanation. Let's start off with something easy. As there has been a lot of time between the last Khanate studio albums and the new one, I'll give you two bands who also did that. Tool versus Guns N' Roses.
Which one do I prefer?
Yeah.
This is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Oh man, I guess I'll go with Tool. When I was very young, I liked Guns N' Roses for a minute.
Yeah, we all liked it.
A little older, I liked Tool for a minute, but I'm actually not so into either band anymore. But between the two, sure, I'll go with Tool.
I think there is also a certain amount of time that a band who at least tries to have some kind of commercial success, or who also depends on a certain kind of a commercial success, like Tool, like Guns N' Roses, you shouldn't stretch it too far. I think that is something that is a very big difference between those two bands and Khanate. If you sell out 1,000 copies, cool. If you sell out 500, I guess the four of you are also still happy because it's your music, right?
Right. Yeah, they're in a whole other situation where, there's a whole bunch of people's livelihood depends on whether the record does good or not. If our record does crap, I don't think anybody's going to be unemployed.
True. One of your band members has been in two bands that I highly like, but that are also still, although they're so important, still too much underground and not enough people know about the two bands. And you have to choose one of them. House of Low Culture or OLD, Old Lady Drivers. Which of James' bands do you like more?
Yeah, I would have to go with Old Lady Drivers. I really like that band quite a lot. I listen to them quite a lot. Yeah, great stuff. And definitely something, if anybody hasn't heard it, should go back and, visit that. Pretty incredible, the music that those guys were making, especially considering the age they were, like when they were doing it. It's so advanced for, people that age.
And also considering the time when they did it. I'm like, that is late 80s, and they did stuff that for the next 10 years, something like that, nobody touched again. Like, very pioneer, very
it was
pioneer.
incredible. Yeah.
But the same also goes for House of Low Culture, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Sumac versus ISIS.
I guess I'll go with ISIS. Just like we played a number of shows with those guys and we're friends with them. I could know the guys in Sumac as well. But yeah, maybe it's just because it's back in the day when like this kind of where I was entering this, ultra heavy music scene in a larger way, and those guys were right there. I saw ISIS and Botch on one of their early tours in New Jersey, maybe 1999 or 2000. I can't remember exactly, but it was me and James from Khanate were there, and there was like 20 people at the show.
Yeah.
And they were just kind of probably one of their first tours. I'm not sure exactly when they started, but anyway, yeah, for me it goes way back in my history, so probably have a bit more good thoughts with those guys.
And there is also always something that plays in there, and that is the whole Hydra Head thing, right? Having this band with a guy who's running a label that is, at least in my opinion, mega important, and that is still underappreciated, I think, in a way. Okay, I'll give you go ahead.
I was just going to mention, just as a quick stupid story like that, I just remember that ISIS and Bot show, James and I ended up in a fight at the show with some guy was spinning in circles with his fist out, and his fist hit Jim, or James somewhere, and we ended up in a full-on some fisticuffs. And I remember when we met Aaron, Jim hadn't met Aaron yet, and neither had I. It's just like, did you guys get into a fight, out in the audience? Like, yeah.
And, I still remember also meeting Aaron for the first time, and he's just one of those most, I don't want to say quiet, because that's the wrong word, but he's one of those guys who is very, very calm and collected. And I can imagine him seeing a fist fight in the audience at his concert.
Yeah. Would say not the best way to meet somebody, maybe, but there you have it.
Neubauten versus Leibach, or Leibach.
I'll go with Neubauten.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I listened to Neubauten quite a lot, especially back in the days. So yeah, definitely have a stronger feeling for those guys.
Mm-hmm. If you could cover a track by one of the following two artists, which one would it be? Bob Dylan or Nina Simone?
Nina Simone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but Bob Dylan, I don't necessarily dislike him, but I never really got that into his music.
Same here.
His music is very strongly the lyrical thing, and of course I like lyrics to some extent, but for me in music, it's more about the actual sounds, and for a singer, the sound of their voice. And like, I could understand somebody who is very much into lyrics, enjoying him, but for me, I just heard, kind of an annoying tone, coming out of this man.
I don't know what you mean.
Yeah. Right. So without a doubt, Nina Simone.
Mm-hmm. A little bit about, or one question about TV shows. I'm not sure if you have seen, or TV and fantasy stuff. I somehow I imagine you to be somebody who at least watched one of those two. Game of Thrones versus Lord of the Rings.
I never watched Game of Thrones, but I have seen Lord of the Rings,
That's
so
what I
we'll go
thought.
with that.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't had, a TV since maybe the 90s. Actually, I had a TV that I streamed stuff on when I was in New York, but yeah, it's kind of been a couple of decades since I really had any TV, proper TV watching.
Mm-hmm. What do you prefer, writing music or touring?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a tough one. I really like both quite a lot, but I would say writing music. The creative process for me is kind of the main reason to be doing this. But I do love touring. I like traveling and playing music live, so that's a very close second.
Last two, and in both cases you'll get one artist, and you have to choose between two albums. I'm very sure that you have quite an eclectic taste, and I'm very sure that you also know the guy. FX Twin, Richard D. James. Which record would you prefer? Select Ambient Works or Window Liquor?
I'll go with Window Liquor. And you're right, I do like Aphex Twin quite a lot.
Yeah. And last question, also because we already hinted at the band, Swans. Greed or Vasir?
Greed.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah, I listen to that quite a lot. I'm a big fan of the early Swan stuff, and James and throughout their career, but I just have a preference, for the early stuff. But I remember James pointing out in an interview once when we kept on having this Doom thing come up and people trying to bring up Sabbath and whatever. And I think James said something along the lines of, we probably have more in common with Swans than we do Black Sabbath. And, I think that's absolutely true.
And I would sign that 100%. I mean, the only thing, obviously, for me that you have in common with doom metal is the length of the songs. Right. If anybody asks me to describe Khanate, I've already said it before. It is neoclassical music, but played by some dudes who just want to riff it out as much as possible. And that's if I had to describe it, then that would be my description.
Yeah, I think you're spot on.
What do you mean?
I think you're right. I think you're spot on. It's much more in that realm. Even in terms of the drumming, you're not having much like backbeat or whatever. It's almost like the way an orchestra might approach the drumming or something. So yeah, it's coming from a different place than kind of this backbeat blues based doom rock.
Yeah, and I also think the way that the songs are written is just from a very, very different place. But
right.
Who am I to know? So Tim, thanks for all the time. Thanks for the time being here. And for everybody, if you liked this interview and if you like what we do, maybe give us a subscription here on YouTube. Maybe you follow us on our socials, Facebook, Instagram. Drop us a comment if you think that we have gotten something totally wrong and Tim is basically doing breakbeats with post-rock elements. Maybe. Or if you want to support us a little bit more, go to our website where you will find all the information about our Patreon. It'd be cool to see a little bit of appreciation, and whatever, any kind of feedback is good feedback. Tim, thanks for the music, thanks for the cool record, thanks for the insight, and now it's your chance for final last words.
Yeah, well, thanks to you for this interview, much appreciated. And yeah, I mean, I don't have too many final words. Just the word is out there already. It seems with the record, but yeah, I mean, you can buy the record anywhere now. It's available, streaming and whatnot, and yeah, soon we'll be out there doing some shows and see where things go. So yeah, all right,
take care. Bye bye.